We have, for generations, commenced this foundational story with an object, a piece of fruit, gleaming with a deceptive promise. Our collective memory focuses on the physical act, a hand extending, the crisp, fracturing sound of a bite that sundered a world. We have painted this scene, sung songs of it, and taught our children that this moment of commission was the tectonic shift that knocked creation off its axis. We pinpoint the violation of a single, clear command as the precise instant that innocence dissolved like mist in a harsh sun. But what if the narrative we have so carefully preserved has missed the true epicenter of the fracture? What if the greatest tragedy of the Garden of Eden was not an action, but the cavernous absence of one? What if the primordial catastrophe was not located in the sound of rebellion, but was conceived and born in the deafening, pregnant silence that came just before? Let us, together, embark on a pilgrimage back to the dawn of all things. Not as judges seeking to assign blame, but as listeners, straining to hear what has been lost beneath the noise of history. We must attune our souls to a different frequency, to a ghostly query that has haunted the corridors of the human experience, subtly shaping our deepest insecurities, our most profound failures in leadership, and our most painful betrayals of trust. That question is not who committed the act, but a question far more unsettling, far more introspective. Why, in that defining moment, was Adam silent? In that fragile, fulcrum moment of all eternity, as his companion forged from his own side, the very architecture of his heart stood on the precipice, mesmerized by the most elegant and venomous lie ever spun. The first man was present. The sacred text is unequivocal on this point, a detail of chilling significance. He was with her. He stood within earshot, within sight, a direct witness to the most sophisticated sabotage ever perpetrated against the cosmic order. And yet, from the one tasked with guardianship, with the sacred duty to protect, came nothing, not a word of warning, not a cry of alarm, not a whisper of truth. His silence unfurled, not as a shield, but as a vast, empty stage upon which the drama of the fall could play out unimpeded. This is not a trivial detail, not an incidental footnote to be glossed over. No, this is the very heart of the collapse. It was a silence imbued with a gravitational pull stronger than 1,000 protests, a spiritual vacuum that violently siphoned the holiness and wonder from the world. It was the original sin of omission, a failure to act that carried a damnation perhaps even deeper than the wrongful act that followed. To truly comprehend the staggering depth of our need for redemption, to grasp the breathtaking beauty of grace, we must first find the courage to stand within the echo of that terrible silence. Today, we will not merely retell a story worn smooth by time. We will venture into that sacred stillness itself, like archaeologists of the soul, armed with the tools of contemplation and a desire for truth. We will excavate a secret buried not by soil and stone, but by centuries of misdirected focus. It is a secret that speaks not only of humanity's calamitous fall, but one that illuminates the very nature of responsibility, the essence of true courage, and the extraordinary, world-altering promise of a voice that would one day come. A voice that would break every chain of silence, fill every desolate void, and lovingly, painstakingly, restore the shattered symphony. Are you ready to truly listen, perhaps for the first time, to the most important thing that was never said? Our solemn journey begins now. Before the void, before the chilling stillness that licensed the fall, there existed a symphony. To understand the desolation that Adam's silence wrought, we must first immerse ourselves in the vibrant, resonant fullness it desecrated. The Garden of Eden was far more than a pristine landscape of flora and fauna. It was a living, breathing state of being, a symphony of perfect, unhindered communication, where every element of creation, from the celestial to the terrestrial, resonated in flawless harmony. Imagine a world as a grand orchestra. The gentle rustling of the wind through the canopy of the trees was not a mere meteorological event. It was the string section, swelling and fading with the very breath of God, carrying life and creative energy to every corner. The joyous babbling of the four rivers as they tumbled over smooth ancient stones was the percussion section, a rhythmic, life-giving pulse that was the heartbeat of paradise. Even the magnificent roar of the lion, a sound we now associate with danger, was, in that original world, a majestic note from the brass section, a bold, untainted declaration of the strength and vitality of life, existing in perfect concert with the delicate, flute-like song of the wren. Within this dynamic, sound-drenched world, Adam and Eve lived not as an audience, but as the principal conductors. Adam, whose very name was drawn from the Adama, the fertile earth, carried the rhythm of the planet in his soul. He was not a detached overlord, but a participant, inextricably woven into the fabric of the garden. His connection to the soil, the plants, and the animals was one of profound, intuitive communion. When the Creator brought the animals to him to be named, it was not a mere exercise in taxonomy. It was an act of intimate co-creation, a sacred dialogue. As he spoke each name, he was not just assigning a label, he was perceiving and articulating the very essence of each creature, and in return, every living thing seemed to recognize his voice as that of a benevolent steward and friend. And then Eve. Her creation was the symphony's most exquisite movement. She was not molded from the inanimate earth, but formed from Adam's own living side, from the place nearest his heart. She was not a subordinate or a mere helper, but his perfect harmonic counterpart, a lyrical counter-melody that completed his own. Their relationship was the pinnacle of the entire composition. They required no lengthy explanations, no debates to bridge misunderstandings. Their communication was a flawless duet, a dance of two souls so perfectly attuned that a single glance, a shared smile, a light touch conveyed depths of meaning that our clumsy words can no longer capture. They walked together, side by side, in a state of naked, unashamed unity, their individual melodies blending into a chord of perfect love. And above it all, weaving through it all, the very foundation of the harmony, was the voice of God. It was not the disembodied, thundering command of a distant monarch, but an immanent, warm, and personal presence. The scripture tells us he would walk in the garden in the cool of the day, a phrase of breathtaking intimacy. Imagine the creator of the cosmos, the composer of the symphony, strolling in gentle conversation with his beloved children. Communication was the very atmosphere of paradise. Every purpose was defined by his loving word. The single prohibition, a boundary around the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, was not a cage of restriction, but the composer's loving signature on his masterpiece, a mark of trust designed to protect their perfect, simple communion. This was the world of absolute, resonant truth. This was the symphony that a single, calculated silence was about to bring to a crashing, discordant end. Every masterpiece of harmony, no matter how divinely composed, is vulnerable to the deliberate introduction of a single, dissonant note. The saboteur of Eden's symphony arrived not with the clamor of an invading army, but with the insidious, silken sound of a whisper, a sound designed to slither through the cracks in Paradise's foundation. The serpent, described with chilling precision as more crafty, more shrewd than any other creature of the field, understood a timeless principle of spiritual warfare. Why resort to brute force when you can achieve total devastation through corruption of the word? It did not aim its attack at the physical body, it aimed it at perception. It did not confront their strength, it masterfully sowed the seeds of doubt in their trust. Its strategy was a chilling exhibition of malevolent genius. It did not make the amateur mistake of confronting Adam and Eve together, for their unity was a formidable fortress, their combined harmony a shield. Instead, it waited, observing. It sought a moment of separation, a subtle gap in their perfect communion. Perhaps Eve was wandering alone, captivated by the vibrant colors of an orchid, or perhaps Adam was nearby, his attention momentarily diverted by the flight of a newly named eagle. It selected Eve as its initial point of contact, not necessarily because she was more susceptible, but because she represented the heart of the relationship, the center of relational desire and intuition. The ancient enemy has always known, if you can poison the heart, the mind will inevitably follow. With surgical precision, it created a private, isolated conversational space, a venomous bubble of sound designed to subtly quarantine Eve from the protective presence of Adam and the solid certainty of God's clear command. It began its assault not with a declaration, but with a question, cloaked in feigned curiosity and concern. Did God really say, "You must not eat from any tree in the garden"? This question was a weapon of immense sophistication. First, it employed gross exaggeration, twisting a single specific limitation into a sweeping, universal prohibition. This masterstroke of rhetoric instantly reframed God, not as a generous provider, but as a restrictive tyrant, jealously hoarding the garden's bounty. Secondly, and more devastatingly, it planted the first toxic seed of doubt, not merely about the rule itself, but about the very character and motive of the Creator. It whispered the unthinkable, that God was deceptive, that he was holding back something good, that his communication, the very bedrock of their existence, was not entirely transparent. It was a direct assault on the foundation of all love, trust. Eve, in her pristine innocence, unfamiliar with the mechanics of deceit, took the bait. She engaged in the dialogue. She corrected the serpent's misrepresentation, but in doing so, she stepped onto its chosen battlefield. She validated its premise that God's character was a subject open for debate. And throughout this insidious exchange, as this web of venomous whispers began to encircle Eve's mind, where was the garden's guardian? The scripture insists on the damning detail. He was with her. He was there. He heard the gross mischaracterization of God's command. He witnessed this verbal poison being administered to the one he was meant to cherish and protect. The enemy was not at the gates of Eden. It had breached the walls and was operating in the very heart of the home, wielding the only weapon that could truly destroy paradise from within, a carefully calibrated, perfectly disguised lie. The grand symphony was now threatened by a creeping dissonance and a profound, world-altering silence. The silence of the protector began to gather like a storm cloud, thick with unspoken consequence. This was the instant, the single, frozen moment upon which the entire future trajectory of humanity balanced as if on the edge of a knife. Time itself seemed to granulate, to slow, to a thick, viscous crawl. The vibrant air of the Garden of Eden, once alive with the sounds of harmonious life, grew tense and still. The cosmic symphony held its breath, awaiting the resolution of this terrible, discordant chord. For Eve, her inner world was a maelstrom, a violent tempest of conflicting thoughts and burgeoning desires. Before her hung the fruit, no longer just a part of the scenery, but now a luminous, pulsating symbol of everything she was told she could not have. It was a gateway. The serpent's seductive hiss still coiled around her heart. Your eyes will be opened. You will be like God. It was the siren song of self-actualization, of ultimate power, of becoming the arbiter of her own truth. Her entire being, her innate curiosity, her deep-seated desire for life to the full, and her now wavering trust in her Creator was focused like a laser on this single imminent choice. But now, let us do what Adam failed to do. Let us shift our focus from Eve, who stood at the storm's epicenter. Let us turn our full attention to the man standing beside her, the one who was meant to be her anchor. Let us look at Adam. He stood there, a statue of inaction, a silent spectator to the most audacious coup in the history of the universe. His face, which had always been a perfect mirror of the garden's tranquility, was now an unreadable, placid mask. What, in the name of all that was holy, was transpiring within the mind of the first man in that moment of ultimate crisis? Was he simply paralyzed by a fear he had never known? Did the serpent's sheer audacity and Eve's visible hesitation send a shockwave through his innocent system, stunning him into a state of catatonic inaction? Or, more subtly, had the poison of the lie already begun its work in him as well? Perhaps the seed of doubt, while aimed at Eve, had sent out runners that found fertile soil in his own heart, making him wonder, just for a second, if God was indeed a cosmic hoarder, keeping the best for himself. Orant. This is perhaps the most heartbreaking possibility of all had Adam, in a catastrophic misinterpretation of love and leadership, convinced himself that remaining silent was the right thing to do. Did he believe that to interfere would be to control, to dominate her free will? He may have forgotten a critical distinction. His role was not to control, but to protect. His divine commission was to keep the garden. This meant more than just tending the soil. It meant guarding its spiritual and relational integrity from any and all threats. His voice was designed to be a shield. His words were meant to be a bulwark of truth, a single, decisive stop, a firm, loving Eve. That is a lie. Remember the truth of our God, a simple reaffirmation of the reality they had lived every single day. Any sound, any action, any gesture of intervention would have been infinitely better than the abyss of nothingness he offered. But he chose nothing. His silence created a terrifying spiritual vacuum, and in the spiritual realm, as in the physical, a vacuum is an abhorrence that demands to be filled. Adam's silence was not neutrality. It was a passive, implicit consent. It granted the serpent's lie unchallenged dominion over the moment. It forced Eve to face the greatest spiritual battle of her life utterly alone. This was not an act of respectful love. It was a tragic, monumental abdication of his sacred duty. In his silence, he failed to protect his partner. In doing so, he sealed his own fate. And then it happened. The symphony did not just falter, it shattered into a million discordant shards. The first sound to finally break the suffocating, tense silence was not the voice of truth rising in heroic defense. It was a small, quiet, yet cataclysmic sound. The sound of a delicate stem snapping, the sound of a fruit being severed from the branch where it belonged, a rupture in the perfect order of things. Eve, in her final fateful moment of decision, had reached out her hand. The gesture, so simple and graceful, carried the seismic weight of a world on the verge of total collapse. She lifted the fruit to her lips, and the sound of her teeth breaking the skin of rebellion, though barely a whisper in the physical realm, was a deafening thunderclap in the spiritual. It sent a tremor through the very foundations of creation. A single, seemingly small act of disobedience had irrevocably altered the course of all human history. The transformation was immediate and devastating. A new kind of knowledge, a chilling awareness that was the polar opposite of the divine wisdom she had been promised, flooded her being. It was the icy, isolating knowledge of her own nakedness, the burning sting of a new and foreign emotion, shame. But the tragedy did not halt with her. She turned to Adam, who remained there, an immutable statue of passivity. She offered him the remainder of the fruit. It was a silent invitation, born of her newfound fear and isolation, an instinctive plea for him to join her in the terrible solidarity of her transgression. This was Adam's final desperate chance, the chance to recoil in horror, to cry out at the sacrilege, to fall on his face and plead with God for mercy. But the silence had become a part of him, a paralyzing venom that had seeped into his will. He could see the shadow that had fallen over Eve's face. He could feel the very air crackle with a new, terrifying tension. But he did not protest. He did not question. He did not hesitate. He simply took the fruit from his companion's hand and ate. His fall, in many ways, was the greater tragedy. If Eve fell through a masterful deception, Adam fell with his eyes wide open. His was not a sin of ignorance, but an act of conscious, willing complicity, carried out in chilling silence, without a flicker of internal struggle. In that instant, Their auditory world was violently and permanently retuned. The Symphony of Eden devolved into a jarring, painful cacophony. The melodic singing of the birds, which had once been a source of pure delight, now sounded like a shrieking chorus of accusation. The gentle babbling of the brook was no longer a sound of laughter, but a cold, relentless whisper of their inescapable guilt. And for the very first time, they became aware of a new, frantic rhythm emanating from within their own chests, the terrifying, guilty drumming of a fearful heart. They no longer heard the world's harmony. They heard only their own raw, exposed vulnerability. Their perfect unity evaporated, replaced by the stark isolation of two separate, terrified individuals who knew, with sickening certainty, that they were lost. And what was their immediate, instinctual response? They sought refuge in silence once more, but it was no longer the silence of peace. It was the silence of hiding. They scrambled frantically to stitch together fig leaves broad, yet pitifully fragile coverings for their physical nakedness, a desperate hope that they could also hide the new nakedness of their souls. They ran from the presence of the one in whose company they had once found their greatest joy, seeking the darkest shadows of the trees to conceal their burning shame. The lines of communication had been utterly and completely severed. Silence, it seemed, had won a total victory. But no one can truly hide from God. The silence of sin, no matter how thickly layered with leaves and shadows, can never muffle the approaching footsteps of ultimate truth. As the golden light of day began to soften into the long shadows of evening, and the cool breezes the ruach, the very Spirit of God began to stir through the garden. A sound arose. It was a sound that had once been the signal for Adam and Eve's greatest joy, a sound that meant intimate communion. But now, in their newly fallen state, that same familiar sound carried a terrifying new weight, a solemn gravity that made them press themselves deeper into the foliage, their hearts pounding against their ribs. It was the sound of the Creator's footsteps, walking in his garden, his cherished creation, as was his custom. For the two fugitives hiding in the undergrowth, each footfall was like the slow, deliberate strike of a gavel, each one drawing nearer, threatening to expose the pitiful inadequacy of their hiding place. They held their breath, praying for invisibility, a desperate, childish wish against the reality of an omniscient God. And then a voice broke the twilight stillness. It was not the roar of an enraged king, nor the sharp, prosecutorial tone of an investigator. Instead, the voice of God was laden with a profound and piercing sorrow, the heartbroken query of a father whose children have willfully strayed. And the question was directed, with perfect precision, to the leader, the one to whom the first and highest responsibility had been given. Adam, where are you? We must pause here and allow the full weight of this question to settle upon us, for within these four simple words lie the entirety of the tragedy and the first glimmer of hope. The all-knowing God was not seeking geographical coordinates. He could see through every leaf, every shadow. This question, therefore, was not about Adam's physical location. It was a question about his state of being, his very identity. Adam, where is the man of integrity I created? Where is the being who bears my image, now lost in this thicket of fear and shame? Where was your accountability? And Adam, most pressingly, where was your voice when it mattered most? It was a sorrowful, gracious invitation. It was a chance, offered in love, to break the self-imposed silence of sin. It was not a trap designed to ensnare him, but a door mercifully held open for confession. God was inviting Adam to step out of the shadows of his own making and into the cleansing, though painful, light of truth. He was granting Adam, as the designated head, the first opportunity to take responsibility, not just for himself, but for his partner as well. It was a divine summons for Adam to finally do what he had so catastrophically failed to do before, to speak, but this time not to speak in defense of the garden, but in confession of his soul. All of heaven seemed to pause. The angelic choirs fell silent. The wind ceased its rustling. All of creation, now groaning under the new weight of sin, awaited the reply of the first man. Would he grasp this lifeline of grace? Would he admit his failure and cry out for the mercy he had seen demonstrated in the Creator's character every day of his existence? Or would he choose to sink even deeper into the quicksand of denial and deceit? His answer would not only seal his own fate, but set a pattern for generations yet unborn. An immense, weighted silence followed the Lord's searching question, a stillness pregnant with the gravity of a world-altering decision. Finally, the silence was broken by the dry rustle of leaves as Adam, the first man, reluctantly emerged from the shadows. He did not run to his father. He was drawn out, like a suspect from a hiding place. Following closely behind him was Eve, her face a mask of shame, shielded by a cascade of her own hair. Adam's expression was not one of contrite sorrow. It was a hard, complex amalgam of raw fear, sullen defiance, and a desperate, calculating self-preservation. The beautiful simplicity of innocence had vanished, replaced by the tangled calculus of guilt. And then Adam spoke. He finally shattered his own silence. But oh, how much better for him and for the world if he had remained mute. For the voice that emerged from him was not the humble tone of repentance, nor the broken cry for mercy. It was the cold, legalistic voice of self-defense, a voice dripping with the venom of blame, a pathetic and transparent attempt to shift the crushing mountain of his own guilt onto the shoulders of others. "The woman," he began, his first word, a deliberate act of depersonalization, "whom you gave to be with me, she gave me of the tree, and I ate." Let us perform an autopsy on this sentence, for it is a masterclass in the art of shirking responsibility, a tragic blueprint that humanity has followed with meticulous and heartbreaking precision ever since. First, he refers to his beloved partner as the woman, not Eve, not my wife. It is a chillingly effective tool of objectification, instantly transforming the one who was bone of his bone and flesh of his flesh into a detached, problematic third party. Then, with even greater cowardice, he implicitly indicts God himself, "whom you gave to be with me." The unspoken subtext is a monstrous accusation. This isn't really my fault. It's her fault for offering it. And ultimately, Lord, it's your fault for creating her and placing her in my life. If you had just left me alone, none of this would have happened. The voice that was designed to be a shield of protection had been twisted into a dagger of betrayal, plunged directly into the heart of the one he was created to cherish. The sorrowful gaze of the Creator then turned to Eve, offering her a chance to break this toxic cycle. But the lesson in blame-shifting had been swift and effective. She too followed the pattern her partner had just established. "The serpent deceived me," she said, her voice trembling, "and I ate." Like Adam, she admitted the final act, but immediately deflected the core responsibility to the original tempter. She, too, refused to take ownership of her choice, her decision to engage the lie and to desire what was forbidden. The miserable, tragic circle was now complete. Adam's initial passive silence of omission had now metastasized into a chaotic vocal chorus of accusation. No one took ownership. No one sought reconciliation. Not a single soul uttered the simple, healing words, "I was wrong." Instead, fingers of blame pointed outward in a frantic, tangled web of incrimination. The sacred intimacy and absolute trust that were the very atmosphere of Eden had been utterly and irrevocably replaced by suspicion, accusation, and a new, terrible distance. The bond between Adam and Eve was shattered, and the fracture in their relationship with their God had just widened into a vast, seemingly unbridgeable canyon. They had done more than just break a rule. They had desecrated the very nature of love, unity, and responsibility. With the cycle of blame complete and no confession offered, there was nothing more to be said. The truth of their fallen state had been laid bare, not by honest admission, but by the very hollowness of their frantic self-justifications. The garden, once a sanctuary of joy, now felt like a solemn courtroom, the air thick with the gravity of an impending verdict. And then the judgments were pronounced. These were not, however, the arbitrary and wrathful punishments of an offended tyrant. If we listen with spiritual ears, we see that each consequence was a perfect, poetic, and heartbreaking mirror of the specific sin of silence and broken communication that had precipitated it. It was the immutable law of the spiritual harvest. The nature of the seed determines the nature of the fruit. First, God addressed the architect of the rebellion, the serpent, the creature that had so masterfully abused the gift of speech to twist truth and corrupt innocence. Its sentence was a direct and humiliating reversal of its crime. You are cursed. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. Its mouth, the very instrument of its proud, seductive whispers, was now condemned to the dirt, forced to taste the grit and grime of the earth. Its ability to communicate as an equal, to sow lies at eye level, was forever stripped away. Its mode of communication was permanently debased to the lowest possible form. Next, his attention turned to Eve, she who had chosen to attune her ear to the voice of the deceiver rather than the voice of her creator, would now experience a lifetime of pain and conflict in her most vital human communications. I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. The miraculous act of creating new life, an act that should have been one of supreme joy and partnership, would now be forever intertwined with physical agony. And the relational consequence was just as severe. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. The beautiful, harmonious dance of equal partners was shattered, replaced by a painful and frustrating power struggle, a constant tension between a desire for control and an experience of domination. The price for heeding the wrong voice was a life plagued by fractured, painful communication. And finally, God turned to Adam, the man whose defining sin was silence, the one who had passively listened to the voice of his wife over the clear, loving command of his God. His sentence was the most profound, and it was tied directly and irrevocably to the theme of silence. Because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree, cursed is the ground for your sake. Let that sink in. The very earth, the Adama from which he was formed, and with which he shared a deep, symbiotic connection, the ground that once spoke to him in abundance and joy, would now meet his efforts with stubborn, resistant silence. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. He would now have to toil, to sweat, to laboriously wrest a living from a creation that no longer willingly cooperated. The effortless dialogue between man and earth was severed. His punishment was a relentless, lifelong struggle against a world that had gone mute to his needs. The terrible, fitting price for his guilty silence was a life of exhausting labor in a silent, resistant world, until the day he himself would return to the silent dust from which he had come. The story could have concluded there, in the deepening shadows of judgment and utter despair, a paradise lost, its gates barred by an angel's flaming sword, a relationship, once the model of perfect unity, now a tangled wreckage of blame and sorrow, a future sentenced to toil, pain, and inevitable death. If the Creator were merely a God of unbending, retributive justice, this would have been the final, tragic chapter. But the God of the garden is not, and has never been, a God of ultimate silence. Even in that darkest of moments, while the very words of the curse were still hanging in the heavy air, he planted a seed of sound, a single, defiant note of hope. A promise whispered, just quietly enough that the enemy, in his arrogant victory, would fail to grasp its full, world-altering power, but just loudly enough that the broken hearts of humanity could cling to it for generations to come. While pronouncing judgment on the serpent, the temporary victor in this cosmic war, God spoke a strange and cryptic phrase, a glorious prophecy hidden within the folds of a curse. His gaze pierced through the deception of the enemy, and he declared the terms of a new, ongoing war. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. This is the proto-evangelium, the first gospel, the first whisper of good news. It is the very dawn of redemption, announced at the precise moment of midnight for the human race. While Adam, the designated leader and guardian, stood silent and defeated, God himself spoke up. He declared that this was not the end of the story, that the serpent's victory was a temporary illusion. And the most astonishing, paradigm-shifting element was the declared source of the future victory. He did not say that salvation would come from Adam or from the lineage of the man who had failed so spectacularly. No, he promised it would come from the offspring of the woman. In a patriarchal world where lineage, identity, and inheritance were traced exclusively through the father, this phrase was a theological thunderclap. It pointed to something utterly unique, something outside the established order of human procreation. It was the first, subtle hint of a miraculous birth, a divine intervention that would bypass the stream of sin and failure, now flowing from Adam. This promise was God's direct, divine answer to Adam's silence. When humanity failed to speak for truth, God himself spoke a greater, redemptive truth into existence. This promise was a declaration that the silence of sin, shame, and death would not have the final word. Another voice was coming. A true guardian, a perfect champion, an elder brother would one day arrive on the scene, one who would not remain silent in the face of lies. He would not stand passively by. He would meet the enemy head on, and the victory would be costly. You shall bruise his heel. This foretold of suffering, of pain, of sacrifice. The promised hero would be wounded in the battle, but that wound, though real and painful, would not be a mortal one. For, though wounded in the heel, he shall crush your head. A bruised heel is a recoverable injury. A crushed head is utter, final, and complete annihilation. It was the promise of a decisive, ultimate victory, won through suffering. Hope was not extinguished that day in Eden. It was simply whispered, like a sacred secret, a burning ember to be carefully passed from one generation to the next. It became the scarlet thread of promise woven throughout the entire tapestry of the Old Testament, a quiet, fervent anticipation for the one who would finally come to fulfill the promise, to break the curse, and to restore the shattered symphony of creation with the music of his own sacrificial love. The echo of Adam's silence is not an ancient artifact, a sound confined to the distant past and preserved only in Scripture. It is a living, breathing phenomenon. It reverberates through our modern world, weaving its way into the most mundane and the most critical moments of our lives. It resounds in the nervous hesitation of an employee who witnesses injustice in the workplace but says nothing, fearing for their job. It echoes in the cold, stubborn quiet between a husband and wife, when a single, vulnerable "I'm sorry" could bridge the chasm but remains unspoken. It is present every time we know the truth that would bring freedom or healing, but choose the comfort and safety of silence to avoid conflict or disapproval. Each of us, in countless ways, has stood in our own personal garden, faced with that same primordial choice: to use our voice for truth and love, or to retreat into the damning safety of silence. Adam's failure is not merely his story. It is a profound and uncomfortable mirror of our own human condition. But thanks be to God, the grand narrative of humanity does not culminate in the failure of the first man. It reaches its breathtaking, triumphant climax in the victory of the promised one, the one who is the perfect and complete antithesis of Adam's silence. Thousands of years after that first promise was whispered, amidst the wreckage of the garden, that promise took on flesh and bone. Jesus, the eternal Word of God, through whom all things were made, became a man. If Adam was the man formed from silent dust, Jesus was the creative, life-giving Word made tangible. He was, and is, the voice that Adam was created to be, but failed to become. He was not silent. He spoke truth to the corrupt and entrenched powers of religion and empire. He spoke words of healing and value to the outcasts, the marginalized, and the unseen people of his society, the despised tax collector, the shamed woman, the leper. He courageously challenged the deeply ingrained lies and suffocating hypocrisy of his age, not with the arrogance of a revolutionary, but with the authority of divine love. He did precisely what Adam failed to do. He consistently used his voice as a shield and a sanctuary for those he came to save. And on the cross, he willingly entered into the most profound and terrifying silence imaginable, an abyss of cosmic abandonment we can never fully fathom, crying out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" as he bore the full, crushing weight of humanity's sin. Yet he shattered even the absolute silence of the tomb, striding out on the third day in glorious resurrection, speaking the final, definitive word of victory over sin, death, and silence itself. The story of Adam and Eve serves as our solemn, necessary reminder of the immense weight and devastating consequence of silence. But the story of Jesus is our powerful, liberating invitation. Because of his life, death, and resurrection, we are no longer destined to be prisoners of the same fear that struck Adam mute. We have been given his Spirit, the Ruach, the very breath of God, who empowers us with courage and gives us a new voice. A voice to bring healing where there is hurt, to speak truth with love where lies prevail, to defend those who cannot defend themselves, and to proclaim the good news that the promise has been gloriously fulfilled. So today, what silence are you being called to break in your own life? Is it an overdue apology, a word of encouragement to someone who is struggling, an expression of gratitude? Is it a difficult but necessary conversation you have been avoiding? Do not let the tragic echo of Eden be the defining sound of your life. Let the fulfilled promise, the victorious word of Christ, give you your voice. Let us choose to break the silence. For in the magnificent, restored economy of God's kingdom, every single word spoken in truth, love, and courage becomes a precious, beautiful note in the grand and unending symphony of redemption.